But those vulnerabilities based our decision making in terms of grading Nicola as high risk, and have continued to form part of my investigation throughout.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. So what are Nicola Bulley's specific vulnerabilities? Look at this picture. And what you see is a knee brace, and that certainly shows that there's the possibility of an injury. And what that could be, if she's hurt her knee, I know that she wasn't running towards the end of her Strava. She sort of ran right at the beginning, and then it was walks. There wasn't really that much running. And so one wonders whether she hurt her knee. And if she did hurt her knee, could that have played a factor in falling into the river? And also, if her knee was hurt, could that have played a factor in being unable to get out of the river? And my instinct basically says that that's not really the factor. Although it is a vulnerability, I think the specific vulnerability is more than likely something else. But I think it is important to look at that knee and see that although she was 45 years old and apparently in good health, she could have had some underlying issue besides a knee that was somewhat injured that could have compromised her in some subtle way. And so we're going to look at that in this episode. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're enjoying this video, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Now, what I found quite interesting during the press conference is the image that they had on screen. It was an image of Nicola, a selfie that she took, and it's a picture of her with Willow in the background and then the water in the background there. And I have to acknowledge, during my independent investigation, when I was just looking, just sort of curious and just digging around, when I went and looked at Nicola's Strava, you just saw the same thing repeated over and over again. Nicola, Willow, water. Nicola, Willow, water. And then you have the situation where she disappears. Nicola, Willow, water. And you can interpret that as someone who's looking at her Strava, and that's certainly one way of doing it, but the Strava just doesn't go on for very long. It's really 1 month of patterns, and it's not only walks to the park, it also includes other things. She doesn't go every single day, and so if you did want to base it on her patterns, you would need to be a little bit lucky to encounter her on a particular day in question. And so that then brings us back to this question of specific vulnerabilities. And I think this is where you've got to think about what law enforcement are thinking and read between the lines in terms of what they're saying. And this is how I interpret it. This is my interpretation. So when they say high risk and specific vulnerabilities, what could have made Nicola high risk, right? What could have made her high risk in terms of those specific vulnerabilities? Well, high risk in terms of what? High risk in terms of being abducted, high risk in terms of being attacked, or high risk in terms of something else, high risk in terms of being vulnerable to perhaps the elements. And she was thin, she was small, that is something I've mentioned before, but maybe there's something else that made her even higher risk. Right? Maybe she had asthma. Maybe she had, she could swim very well, but maybe she had a heart condition. And that could be potentially activated in a stressful situation such as falling into cold water. And so what I think is very important to stress here is I think what the police mean is high risk in terms of the theory that the cops are pushing. So, in other words, what they know, and there's something they know that we don't know, gives them reason to believe this is a very plausible theory that they have. And I think if we knew what they know, then we would probably think the same thing. I don't think it's high risk in terms of she was beautiful, and so that was likely the cause of foul play. She often went to the park. That's the cause of foul play. I don't think that is what they're talking about. I don't think that's a specific vulnerability specific to Nicola, not specific to anybody else. I think it's something that is related to a medical thing. And so what could that be? And you may remember early on I suggested that it's not just falling into the river and disappearing or falling into the river and drowning. It could be that combined with something else. So one of the early scenarios I suggested was falling into the river, banging her head on a rock, and then being stunned or being concussed, and then that leading to a complication of whatever followed, right? But this high-risk thing seems to suggest something specific. I mean, the concussion is something that could have happened as a result of the fall, but what could have actually led to her falling into the river in the first place? In other words, what could have prompted her to get up off the bench and then be disoriented, dizzy, and sort of stumble, and because of gravity, because of vertigo, because of not being certain where she was, she ended up locomoting herself into the water, and then that whatever that condition was continued. Well, what could that be? So in other words, what I'm trying to say is, think about the following scenario: she's sitting on the bench, everything is normal, and then whatever this medical condition is creeps up on her. And let's say it's some sort of seizure. Let's say it's some sort of epileptic event, right? Where she's unable to control her motor functions. And that actually leads her to sort of stepping slightly forward or not being able to sit on the bench. And she then starts rolling down or sort of falling into the water, right? And that is actually why the leash is where it is, because maybe she was holding it, right? And that is where she let go of it. And then she ends up in the water, and it's not landing in the water that is so bad. It is the seizure that she's still having in the context of water, and maybe being in the water makes it 10 times worse. She panics, and so the seizure gets even worse. So if the seizure persisted in the water, that could have actually led to drowning. That could have led to an inability to reach for the side of the riverbank. That could also have compromised her ability to climb out on that side. But I don't actually think it's like that. I think she perhaps had some limited mobility. She knew she was in the water, and during that seizure, maybe it helped. She could at least keep her head above water. And this aided her in floating perhaps some way, perhaps slightly around the corner. But for whatever reason, she was impaired in some other way. Perhaps she couldn't see. Perhaps she lost control of certain motor functions, perhaps her legs. Perhaps she could use her arms, but not her legs. But she was compromised in some way. And we saw exactly that in the Nora Corrin case. I wrote a book about that. Nora Corrin had a kind of a mental disability, and that's why she got lost. That's why anyone else going into that situation could have found their way back, but because she had a problem with orientation, that's why she got into trouble. That's why she got lost in the jungle. And what may have happened to Nicola, she may have kind of got lost within the seizure episode in that water. And obviously the cold would have done its job, and she's moving, and maybe she went over the weir as well, right? And in other words, maybe the original thing, this vulnerability, was a seizure, and not just an ordinary one, quite a serious one. And so we don't know that for sure. Time will tell, but it certainly is a working theory. What do you think? Does that make sense? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.